Episode 47, The New Husband. Carl and his wife, Cindy, were recently married, and after a smooth sailing ride for the first couple of years, cracks in the marriage began to form and the petty arguments became more frequent. And the more Carl tried fixing the marriage, the worse the situation got, as Cindy always had reasons to fault Carl for something he did. It would either be making the floor dirty, or not making the bed after waking up. There was always an issue to argue about. And after things turned hopeless, Cindy eventually filed for a divorce, and Carl moved out to an apartment before they eventually sold off the house. One day, as Carl met up with one of his good friends, Jake, Carl took the opportunity to share everything that had happened within the past few horrid months leading to his divorce. Carl said, "Until today, I don't know what happened, man. Those little things that Cindy would get upset about, it just felt as though it was never her. She never used to get upset over such petty issues." "Yeah, man. I'm sorry that had happened. I never thought that Cindy would ever turn out this way. Back when you guys were dating, she was head over heels for you. I remembered how she was the one who was initiating meetups and was the one constantly chasing you. You were mostly passive and were busy enjoying your time with friends and more focused on your work," said Jake. "That's the thing that I don't get. Why did she change so much? Because it's not as though we never lived together. Before we got married, I was always over at her parents' home, and she was always completely fine with the little things. So to me, it just doesn't make sense that she got upset over things that never bothered her before," said Carl. Jake then replied, "Yeah, it would make more sense if you guys never lived in the same house together. Then I would understand how she never knew the real side of you. And discovering how you behave at home made her have a change of heart. And I have never caught any hints that there is a third party involved. So all this behavior of hers just doesn't make sense," said Carl. After thinking about what Carl had just said, Jake asked, "Speaking of which, have you tried talking to a religious leader about this?" "No, why would I?" asked Carl. "I heard plenty of times before that married couples break up without a reason, and that the victim in the marriage would be at a complete loss about what led to the divorce. Then, when they eventually sought the advice of a religious leader, turns out that there was really a third party involved that they never even suspected," said Jake. "Oh, so you think there could still be another guy involved, although I've never sensed anything fishy going on?" asked Carl. "Probably, since there's no concrete reason for why Cindy changed. And in some of the stories that I've heard, the third party would go through a dark practitioner to make the married person fall for them and eventually divorce their spouse," explained Jake. "Really? Such things exist?" said Carl. "Yeah, man. I know it's hard to believe, and it doesn't mean that it definitely happened to you. But it's worth a try. What have you got to lose?" said Jake. "I don't know, man," said Carl, sounding unsure of the idea. "Okay, how about I bring you to someone that can help? I mean, you can just seek his advice, and if there's nothing wrong, at least you can be at peace that your marriage wasn't meant to be," said Jake. Carl finally agreed, and the next day they visited the religious leader, Mr. Paul, at his home. After Carl had explained to him about the details of his failed marriage, Mr. Paul then said, "Do you have a photo of you with Cindy?" "Oh yeah, sure, here's a photo of us," as Carl took out his smartphone and showed his social media profile page filled with the couple's photos. "Okay, give me a moment," said Mr. Paul as he took the smartphone, held it while closing his eyes and whispered some prayers. A couple of minutes later, Mr. Paul opened his eyes and said, "Okay, there's someone at her workplace who had been in love with Cindy for the past few months. He initially wanted to get close to her, but after other colleagues told him that Cindy was married, he got disappointed, but didn't give up." "Wow, these types of people really have no shame," said Jake. "Yes, he tried to get close to Cindy anyway, but Cindy pushed him away. But deep within, he felt that if Cindy wasn't married, she wouldn't reject his advances. So his frustrations got the best out of him, and he eventually took the dangerous route of engaging a dark practitioner," said Mr. Paul. "See, I told you that this could happen." "Okay, sir. Then what did the guy do next?" asked Jake. "So, after engaging the dark practitioner, the guy slowly inched his way into Cindy. He started to notice Cindy lowering her guard, and day by day, he began to give Cindy small gifts. Sometimes a slice of cake, and sometimes surprised her with a breakfast meal on her table before she arrived at the office," explained Mr. Paul. Hearing this, Carl began getting agitated and said, "Are there really no one else to go after? Does he really have to go after someone else's wife? What is wrong with him?" The air became silent, but after Carl managed to calm himself down, he asked Mr. Paul, "So, sir, is there any way to get Cindy back?" Mr. Paul then replied, "There is, but the spell on Cindy had gone on for far too long. It would have been more possible if we did the healing much earlier, when you guys just started having arguments. Now that the spell hovers heavily over her, it could risk both lives." "As in?" asked Carl. "Exactly what you're thinking. If the healing process doesn't go well, which most likely it won't, both Cindy and the guy will pass away. Cindy will pass away as she is already way too close to the dark spell. The other guy will even more likely pass away, since the deal will be broken if we heal your wife." "Wow. What do you think I should do?" asked Carl. "It's entirely up to you, Carl. Are you willing to take the risk for that little chance of curing Cindy, or are you willing to search for a new path in life?" said Mr. Paul. "I don't know," said Carl. "It's okay. Go home and give it a few days, or even a few weeks. Think about it thoroughly, about what it is that you want to do," said Mr. Paul. "Okay, then, I guess I'll come back again. I really have no idea at this point," said Carl. "Yes, take your time. No matter what you choose, just remember to be very careful with your relationships in the future. Guard it well. And if there are any odd and unexplainable signs, you can always come back to me for help before things get out of hand," said Mr. Paul. Carl and Jake left Mr. Paul's home that evening, and Carl thought about what Mr. Paul had said earlier. Hours turned to days, and days turned to weeks, as Carl still contemplated on what he wanted to do. As he was still indecisive, Jake finally told Carl that they needed to get away and have a short trip overseas to clear their minds before Carl could then make a decision on what to do next. A week went by, and after their men's trip, the buddies eventually came back refreshed, and Carl was now less sad and definitely less angry at the situation. In the cab on the way home from the airport, As he was looking out the window, Carl told Jake, "Jake, I think I have made my decision. I think I know what I want to do now." "I'm guessing you're talking about your situation with your ex-wife," said Jake. "Yeah, I think I'm going to let it go," said Carl. As Jake had seen the decision coming, he wasn't that surprised at what Carl had said. Jake knew that from the joy he was having overseas, he knew that Carl had already made the decision even before they went on their overseas trip. But just out of curiosity about what Carl was actually thinking about, Jake just asked, "So, what made you decide?" "Well, for the first few weeks of thinking about my horrifying marriage, I recalled how much I suffered, and even though Mr. Paul said that the dark spell made Cindy behave that way, there's this side of me who just couldn't forgive Cindy. I couldn't forget the hatred that Cindy had on her face and how much she seemed so disgusted looking at me," said Carl. "So you're not going to give it a chance?" asked Jake. "I did think about it, but then I also remembered how Mr. Paul said that both of them might die from this healing process. So the fact that I just could no longer accept my ex-wife if she did turn nice again, and that the guilt that I would have to carry if they died from this, I would rather move on. I believe that karma will come for the guy, and I wish Cindy the best," said Carl. The pair met up with Mr. Paul a few days later, and Carl shared about his decision. Mr. Paul then said, "Okay, Carl, I understand. And I know that part of you feels like it's not entirely the guy's fault, and Cindy should have set her boundaries instead. But I believe that some things happen for a reason. Maybe the divorce is actually a good thing for you. It could possibly bring you towards a better path in life." The pair left Mr. Paul's home for the last time, and as time went by, Carl eventually became truly at rest with what had happened to him. And like Carl's story, it unfortunately had happened to many other married couples. All the third party needed was sometimes just a strand of the lady's hair, cast a spell, and the wife would eventually fall in love with him, all through the easy and evil way of going through the dark and demonic underworld.